Yo, what's going on guys? It's Daniel and this is Tech Tuning. Welcome back to my next video. Today what I'm going to be trying to tackle on the Celica is going to be replacing the carrier bearing on the drive shaft. So as you guys have probably known from the few videos I've been making, especially one of my recent ones where I swapped the differential, I've had an intermittent noise on the car where every time you're letting off the gas, especially if you're going downhill, which I've noticed recently, which is interesting, if you're letting off the gas, it's got this bad kind of clunking and whirring and spinning sound somewhere in the car. It was really bad when I first got the car. I took it to a couple different places. They told me it was the diff, so I swapped the diff to a super one that I had, but I really didn't have any difference in the sound. So I took it to a trans shop where they told me that my trans gears were completely shot, and I had it rebuilt, and there was definitely a huge improvement there. The car is a lot quieter now, but I'm still hearing this one noise somewhere in there that was probably unrelated to the trans, but I'm still hearing it. Recently on Instagram, when I was poking around at the car, I was debating swapping the old differential back in to see if that would make any difference, but I figured I would go through and I would inspect some stuff before I really dug into that big job again. And what I noticed is that the drive shaft had a lot of slack in it. I'll try to throw the clip in right here. But as you guys could see, if you pushed on the drive shaft with hardly any force, it would move around a lot. And I talked to a lot of you guys who watched the videos and got a lot of opinions. I had some people say that it was really out of spec and there was way too much play in it. And I had a few people say that it didn't seem that bad and there's supposed to be some play in it. To me, it looks like the original carrier bearing, and I bought one off Parts Geeks for I want to say $30. For as low as the cost is and the chance that it could be a bad carrier bearing and that's the noise I'm hearing, I'm just gonna go ahead and replace it. So I'm not too familiar with the process. I've never had to replace a carrier bearing before. From what I can tell and from what some of you guys have told me, it seems pretty easy. So I'm just gonna give it a shot and I'm gonna take you guys along for the ride. So yeah, let's get right into it, guys. So the first thing that I'm gonna start with is I'm gonna take a little paint marker here and I'm gonna mark a couple points on the drive shaft just to make sure when we reinstall it, it goes back on the same way we took it off, because the drive shaft is balanced to be put on a certain way. So we want to make sure that we maintain that same orientation. The next thing that I want to do is I want to take a pry bar and I want to test these U-joints by putting some pressure on them and seeing if these are any good either. Because if the U-joints are bad, then there's not going to be much sense in replacing the carrier bearing unless we get those replaced too. So by the looks of it, our U-joints seem to be okay, so I'm going to put the pry bar to the side, and I'm going to get back to pulling off these bolts on the drive shaft. So from underneath the car, looking at the carrier bearing right in the middle of the drive shaft, we can see that there's going to be 4 of these 12mm nuts and bolts that hold the drive shaft together, and then I believe it looks like 2, I want to say maybe 17mm bolts, but I'll let you guys know for sure in a moment when I take off those, that hold a bracket and the carrier bearing on. And it's going to be really important for us to know which way the carrier bearing is oriented so that we put it on the right way when we put the new one on. So I'm going to put one back in there just for safety, just loosely, so if it does come loose at any point, it's not going to drop on me. And I'm going to move on to trying to now take off those carrier bearing bolts. So the carrier bearing bolts appear to be 14mm in size. Alright, so as you guys can see, the drive shaft is definitely hanging down now. It looks like we just still need to manage to separate it. I'm going to try to take either a flathead or a pry bar, something with a really thin edge, to try to split it in between the 2 drive shafts. I'm pretty sure that they're just flat faces that connect, and I think they're just stuck from being together for so long. So I'm going to give that a shot and see if we can get those apart. Alright, we have success. So as we can see, I've split the 2 drive shaft halves from one another. What it looks like we have to do now, I put one bolt back up here also just to keep this in place so it was easier to manage everything. What it looks like we have to do now is take this retaining nut off, and then I'm guessing this part right here is going to detach, and then we can slip the bearing out and put the new one on. So what I'm gonna do again is take another small flathead to try to pry this open, and then we'll get a big socket in either a breaker bar or an impact to try to get this nut off. So at this point, I took out the whole remaining back half of the drive shaft. Probably wondering why I did that, which I'll explain in a second. But first, I just want to say it's not that hard to take out. If you're gonna follow the steps that I'm doing exactly to replace this carrier bearing, then you could probably do it without taking this out, but I'll show you why I did in a moment. It's the same at the back of this drive shaft though as it is at the front. It's just gonna be 4 12mm nuts and bolts. If you remember in my Supra differential video, we took this off and we left this hanging in the car, but same concept here. It's just gonna be those 4 12s, and I have those to the side right here. But yeah, I pulled this whole shaft out for the reason I'll show you now. So if you are coming underneath the car here, you can see this is the drive shaft tunnel, where that's where it would connect to the differential. And then the drive shaft would come all the way up through here and go to this one that we left off working on. And the reason I took out the other one is to make space so that I could get this locking center nut off, because I didn't have enough room to get anything to pry open the part that you bend. So what this will enable me to do is I'm gonna try and take a flathead, and I'm gonna try to use the space that I've now created to hammer that bend out. That way I can remove the nut and we can proceed with taking off the center bearing. Alright, so as you guys could see just now, I used the impact and I took this locking nut the last of the way off, and there was no problems there. With the impact, it was great because I didn't have to worry about holding the drive shaft still. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take out the 2 bolts that I put back in to hold it in place. That way it drops down, and we should be able to just slip the entire bearing off. This front piece should be able to come off first like that, and we have this washer here that we're going to make sure we keep in the right spot, and then we can see there's another washer behind it and the bearing right there. So let's try and take this off now. Alright, so you can see I take a wood block right there and I put it underneath to support the drive shaft. And now we're going to take a look at the new bearings. So looking at the bearings here, you can see this is the one that just came out of the car. And you can see they hang like this actually. So this is going to be the top, this is going to be the bottom. And in terms of direction, you want to make sure that these notched parts are facing the back of the car. So these are going to be going towards the back. So if you're looking at it from underneath, this is exactly the way it should look. You can see, comparing the two, that if we line them up the way they would both go into the car, the one on the left that I took out is significantly worn out. There's a lot of play that I can move it around with just my thumb, whereas when you come over to this one, it barely moves at all. You just want to make sure you also keep track of these washers, because this one came out from right here. So when we put this back in, we're going to put this one in first before we reattach this. What I'm going to take the time to do now is I'm just going to clean up everything on this piece here with some brake clean. And I'm going to put fresh grease on this, as well as here and on the shaft that the bearing is going to slip over. That way everything is smooth. And then after that, you'll see me putting this back in. Alright, so I've prepped the new bearing to go on, and like I told you guys, I made sure to get the alignment right. So this is going to be facing the back, and this is going to be the bottom half of the bearing. So let's get to installing this one back into the car. Alright, so now I'm going to take the bearing, I'm going to put it back up with the heat shield. We're going to want the heat shield facing the exhaust side of it, just the way we took it off. And I'm going to put the 14s back in to bolt the bearing back up. So with the bearing now loosely bolted up so that I can still adjust it before we put the drive shaft back in, I'm going to take a flathead and a hammer and we're going to dent that nut back in to lock it back into place. Our next step is going to be starting to fit the drive shaft back into the car. So now that the back is loosely bolted up, I was able to slip the front back onto where the carrier bearing goes, since I left it loose and I had some slack to play with it. And I'm going to do the same thing as before, where I'm going to look for my paint marks that I made and line those back up again. So now that everything is loosely bolted back together, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go through and I'm going to snug up everything on the drive shaft, and then we're going to tighten up where our carrier bearing sits, because it looks like it's already started falling into place, which is pretty good for us. So I have all the backs snugged, and I did them in a star pattern similar to how you'd put on the lug nuts. That way everything is evenly snugged and tightened. And I'm going to do the fronts now, and then I'll go back and tighten these up, and then we'll tighten the carrier bearing. Alrighty, so we can see front to back, everything is now installed. And if I try to shake the drive shaft now, there's almost no play in it. So that's hopefully going to make a huge difference. Let's get everything down and try and go for a test drive.
Definitely messed something up though, because I can feel a lot of vibration as I'm starting to get up to like 45 miles an hour. So I'm not sure what exactly that could have been. Maybe I messed up the alignments of the drive shafts. I'm gonna have to take another look at that and see what I can figure out. I marked everything as best as I could, so I'm pretty sure there's no issue there, but...
Okay everybody, so that is going to about wrap it up for this carrier bearing video, but there's a few things that I wanted to talk about before we leave off. Mainly what I wanted to go over is some of the mistakes that I made in this video. Number one of those is that my U-joints were actually bad, and number two is that I did misalign the drive shaft a little bit. This outro is taken pretty long after I've done the carrier bearing install, as you can probably see because my hair is way longer. So what I did do is I went back and I double checked my alignment on the drive shaft, and I did make a mistake there. I had marked the drive shaft in a couple places and I had those lined up correctly, but the issue was the little splined connector that goes in front of the bearing was on incorrectly. So I fixed that and I went for another test drive, but the issue was still there of having some vibration. What I found out is that this vibration is actually most likely due to the fact that I put a new bearing in and didn't replace those U-joints, which were bad. I took the car to a driveline shop and he was the one that informed me my U-joints were no good and that whatever I had done to check them probably wasn't thorough enough. What he recommended to me is, since the U-joints are staked and technically they can't be replaced, that I would have to get a whole new drive shaft. What he explained to me is that because they are staked U-joints, they technically can't be replaced. While you could press them out and put other joints in, there's no way to make sure that those new joints are going to stay in the correct position. With that being said, he did say I should get a new drive shaft, which I am looking into doing, and I do have a video that I'm working on for that coming up. With those things addressed, I just wanted to tell you guys that this carrier bearing install is still technically the correct way to do it. You just have to make sure that your U-joints are good and that you align every single part of the drive shaft correctly. This video was kind of on the fence. I wasn't sure if I was going to post it. Even though the tutorial was a little bit difficult to get through, the purpose of this video is also for the progression of the car. There's been a lot of work that I've been doing, and my channel goal isn't just to produce tutorials, but to also tell the story of my car and all the work that I've been going through with it to get it to the point that I want it to be at. That's enough of me talking though. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I really do hope that the video might help you out if you have to replace a carrier bearing, and all I can recommend is being really thorough with your work, and if you have to, take it to an expert, because sometimes that is the best option. Thank you for your support, thank you guys for always watching the videos, for liking, commenting, and thank you guys for just always being a part of this channel. I will see you guys in the next video with hopefully some good news about the car.